This is Anne Finch. She's the Countess of Winchelsea, and she's writing. Well, she was born just after all my projects always seem to start with the Royal Society's foundation, strangely enough. And she's writing in the kind of late 17th, early 18th centuries. She writes an invocation to sleep, which I now realise is in a font sort of kind of tiny, and people my age probably can't see it. But anyway, she says, this is just to show you really how important sleep was in the early Enlightenment and the Enlightenment. And quite as much as it is in any other period. An invocation to sleep. She was a depressive, what we now call depressive. She was, and we'll see how in a second. She says, "How shall I woo thee, gentle rest, to a sad mind with cares oppressed? By what soft means shall I invite thy powers into my soul tonight? Yet, gentle sleep, if thou wilt come, such darkness shall prepare the room as thy own palace overspreads, thy palace stored with peaceful beds. And silence too shall on thee wait, deep as in the Turkish state, whilst still as death I will be found, my arms by one another bound. And my dull lids so closed shall be, as if already sealed by thee. Thus I'll dispose the outward part, would I could quiet to my heart." What this is showing us is that sleep is highly valued, that you need to create the correct conditions for sleep, that early modern and Enlightenment people took very seriously the conditions of sleeping, so they probably wouldn't have their mobiles on in the bedroom. And it, as Bill hinted at, was deemed vital for the replenishment of one's vital faculties, and that included mental and physical. So this is moving on to her Pindaric Ode on the Spleen. The spleen is kind of cognate with modern depression, but it's got a different mechanism to it. It was also called melancholia, the vapours, because they thought black bile was burning up from the. It's a kind of humoral idea that a malfunctioning spleen would send vapours up to the brain and cloud them, and then theories change over the Enlightenment. But this is her recovering from a serious bout of illness, and I thought. Professor Foster was it kind of made very important points actually about the interaction of illness and sleep. But she was a constant sufferer of what we might call depression and anxiety. And this is her talking about her Ode on the Spleen, her experience of melancholia and depression. "Trembling sometimes thou dost appear, dissolved into a panic fear. On sleep intruding, dost thy shadow spread thy gloomy terrors round the silent bed, and crowd with boding dreams the melancholy head. Or when the midnight hour is tolled, and drooping lids thou still dost waking hold, thy fond delusions cheat the eyes, before them antic spectres dance, unusual fires their pointed heads advance, and airy phantoms rise." And these hallucinations are an expected part in the early modern period of the experience of melancholia. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Well, yes, I'm saying here in this bullet point, they're kind of an accepted symptom with a known logic, which changes. But there's what you get with medical theory is a hangovers from previous theories, as I'm about to kind of tell you. So. Medical ideas that were current from the middle and from the classical times, actually, into the Middle Ages, linger on vestigially into the 18th century. The age of reason, as we're told it is, but in fact, it's a period which is very much more complicated than that. Anyway, so we might think about what Finch's stressors were. I'm going to talk about stress a little bit more in a second. But we can look at various and speculate about various causes of her depression and reasons why she might not be sleeping as well, not least the unstable political environment which she was embroiled in. I haven't got time to talk about that, but that surely was causing her to lose sleep. Stress. I'm trying to point to the link between melancholia, spleen, vapours, and sort of where do these categories shade into each other? Where's the line between stress and pathological symptoms of a different nature? Just to say, I thought Bill was really interesting on stress definitions in the Middle Ages, because, again, you probably can't see them very well, but this is Dr. Johnson's dictionary definition of stress. And he says, probably erroneously, that it comes from Anglo-Saxon. The Saxon violence, he says, stress means. And his noun entry is important part, or violence, force, either acting or suffered. And then he quotes from John Locke, the father of psychology. And Locke says, though the faculties of the mind are improved by exercise, that means using them, yet they must not be put to a stress beyond their strength. Which seems remarkably modern to me, actually, very interesting. They must not be put to a stress beyond their strength. And he says the verb to stress is to distress, actually. That's how he defines it, to put to hardships or difficulties. Now, obviously, our contemporary definitions of stress are very technical and highly refined, but I thought it was worth pointing out the Enlightenment idea of that, and Dr. Johnson's is clearly quite different in a way from the mechanism that Bill was talking about. But John Locke's interesting, of course, as well, because he's taking an Enlightenment idea of stress. Yes, this is my friend Sasha, a former colleague. She's written a really good book on sleep in early modern England. I advise you all, if you're interested, to read that. I've stolen many ideas from it, including one. Actually, I haven't really stolen this one. This one's all right. Everyone knows this because our speakers have already demonstrated it, that sleep is cultural and historical. It exists at a certain cultural and historical moment. What fascinates me from my work on consumption and tuberculosis, melancholy and depression, is always this tension between the biological reality of a virus, a bacterium, whatever it might be, a tubercle bacillus, and the way that scientific phenomenon, if you like, is inserted into the social realm via bodies inhabited by people who live in worlds that are very different, in climates that are very different. I was very interested by the discussion we had about siestas in Spain versus. And early modern people, of course, had their own, as Professor Foster pointed out, very different exposure to natural light in a period which was primarily agricultural, living by agricultural times. But having said all that, the 18th century was a time when modernity was arriving, as it were. The Royal Society was founded in 1660, modern science, and the rise of the industrial age. Okay, so Sasha Handley shows the importance of distinct historical ideas and environments in moulding sleep's daily practice. Now, this argument about biphasic sleep, by Kirsch's idea, Handley argues actually it's more complicated than this, and this is what we find in probably in all periods, actually, that people's sleep patterns are very variable depending on social groups. Their religious beliefs, for example, can be, and certainly in the 18th century, affected quite profoundly how people slept and how they prepared themselves for sleep, what they thought about their sleep. In the so-called age of reason, religion was actually still very important. And there's lots of argument about exactly how important it was in the Enlightenment. But it still was. We know this from Dr. Johnson himself, who was terrified of death and visitations of religious nature upon him. But we are moving towards a new relationship with nature. We've got cities evolving, more so, London not least. We've got the rise of the 18th century lifestyle, modernity, and by lifestyle I mean the lifestyle of the upper orders was evolving into a kind of it's still an aristocratic lifestyle mostly, actually, but it's moving towards that lifestyle where people are staying up all night, gambling, partying. The aristocracy had different sleep patterns to the peasant in the field, and we'll hopefully get on to a doctor called Samuel Tissot about this. But So what we're thinking about is lifestyle. We're thinking about the rise of nervous disorders predicated on a different idea of the body, which wasn't humoral, and it moved on from being mechanistic and thought about the body as a kind of vibrating nervous system. The importance of the brain was now more important than the stomach, even. Stomach was incredibly important before that. And this sense of the human as vibrating with sensory inputs, this was very important related to a concept of sensibility, and certain individuals be more prone to nervous disorders and because they had more refined sensibility, and they would be prone especially to sleep disorders. I'll give you some concrete examples of that in a second. We were starting to get diseases, what we might think of as Western civilization, or disease of civilization, moving on to, of course, diseases of modern life. Maybe it's the same thing, who can say? Well, you'll probably will in a second. But so this moves on to, this connects with stress anyway, that's what I'm getting towards, that there's a new sort of lifestyle evolving, which involves new stresses, which affects sleep patterns in a different way. I will briefly mention the non-naturals and the importance, these things were within the control of the individual, these ideas from classical times, which are still very important in the 18th century, and still very important in telling people how to live. I think Bill's already said quite a bit of this, but I will talk about, yes, the non-naturals, the 6 things that were supposed to be within the control of humans to regulate themselves, one of which was sleep and waking. Other things were like food and drink, the environment, exercise. You could put yourself in different environments. You could sleep in a different way if you wanted to. You would create the conditions to be different. Passions and mental state are very important for controlling your, or for acting upon your nervous system, and therefore the way you sleep, or your digestive system as well, which continue to actually be very important. I'll just go back a little bit and just mention as well that the optimum amount of sleep depended on your individual constitution or habit, as they called it in those days. That's very interesting within certain patterns. Interesting way of thinking about how people reacted to sleep. It had to be individual. I'm going to skip past Regimen Poetry, which I was going to talk a little bit more about. I've got a new project called Writing Doctors. It's actually all writing healthcare related people, including midwives, cunning women, and all this kind of thing. But doctors themselves wrote these things called regimen poems in the 18th century, which were telling you how to live your life in a healthy way. This is Dr. John Armstrong, The Art of Preserving Health, the poem. And he's published by Benjamin Franklin, actually, this edition, interestingly. And he talks about the way that he from the toils and troubles of the day to heavier toils retires, whom trembling from the tower that rocks amidst the clouds, or Calpe's hideous height, the busy demons hurl or inmain or whelm, or bury struggling underground. He's not having a good time in his sleep, is he? This is indigestion, by the way. This is not even before you get to the passions of the mind affecting you. So digestion was thought to be very important, and, I was all told, don't eat cheese before you go to bed, otherwise you'll have nightmares. The 18th century thought very much the same thing, but had reams of advice on all aspects of how to control sleep via the non-natural. So I'm just kind of hinting towards that, really. This is Dr. Edward Baynard, Health the Poem, another regimen poem. He was saying that work is good for sleep and that idleness is bad. You should be, the idle rich should not be idle. They were destroying their health and their sleep through their ruinous lifestyles. He says, by toil subdued, the warrior and the hind sleep fast and deep. Their active function soon with generous streams the subtle tube supply, and soon the tonic, irritable nerves feel the fresh impulse and awake the soul. So this is work is good for you. I mean, and by that he means more physical work. Actually, 5 minutes. Here we go. Thank you. I'll mention religious stress again because it is very important in the 18th century. I'm not going to talk too much about it now because my emphasis is on modernity, but just to mark our card and say that Armstrong here says, we would not to the superstitious mind suggest new throbs, new vanities of fear. 'Tis ours to teach you from the peaceful night to banish omens and all restless woes. And what that means is well, he's quite a secular view of it here. He's saying, well, don't talk to kids when they're young about, goblins and demons and things like that, because they'll believe you. We're not very far away from, burning witches here in this period, are we? We're just getting out of that kind of thing. So people really, and many people still did believe in demonic visitations and supernatural things, and some people still do today. So we shouldn't just forget that, really, that these social factors were actually very important for people's stress and their relationships. So what we can think about 18th century stresses. What are they? And certainly fear of God and punishment and the devil and punishment was certainly part of the equation. Okay, yes. Now, returning to something I hinted to earlier, very briefly, there was quite a shift from a mechanistic idea of the body earlier in the century. Harvey discovered the blood. The blood was, the body was a machine. But then it became a kind of nervous machine, and a shift of emphasis on the way that the brain controls sleeping and waking, what they called nerve medicine. So the sleep was supposed to restore the nervous system, which was thought of in a holistic way, not quite in the same way as today, but this was the whole person. It was physical and mental and interactive. And if you had very fine nerves, if you were usually of the upper orders, you would have a greater quality of what they call sensibility, i.e., your ability to receive sense impressions, and this was related to your moral status as well. So we're getting on to dreams and things like that, but there's a popular acceptance of the neurological foundations of sleep underpinning a growing sense of the relationship between the conscious and non-conscious mind. Not unconscious at this point, because we got no Freud. We're not there with those sorts of ideas yet. This is why I get onto fashionable diseases. I have a project I've just run, but Natasha was actually right at the start of it. She's written the book on sleep as well, and she's talked about fashionable somnambulism. So the idea that if you suffer from these fashionable disorders of the nervous system, they're a sort of badge of honour, of civilization, if you like, or a sign that you were super refined, and that you were, even today, think, I'm an academic, I don't sleep because I think too much, I'm too sensitive, and there is that sort of idea going on in the 18th century, and maybe we kind of get it from the 18th century as well. So I'm finishing with Samuel Auguste David Tissot, a Swiss doctor, who wrote an essay on the disorders of people of fashion, by which he means that people of mostly the aristocracy, actually, really, the upper orders. And he talked about in his article of sleep and watching. Watching is waking, is being awake. The influence of the passions principally affect our slumbers. The length of our sleep, its regularity and tranquility are the strongest appendages of health. If in this respect we draw a parallel between the rich and brilliant inhabitants of cities and those of the fields, we shall find all the advantages in favour of the latter, i.e. you sleep a lot better if you're a peasant in the field, toiling away. The hour when he retires to rest, which is that designed by nature, obviously marked for the repose of all animals, and the disposition he is in when he resigns himself up to it, renders it impossible that the sleep of the one should resemble that of the other. Which I think what Professor Foster said already. And so he says, the peasant whose nerves are not agitated by any affection of the soul, or blood inflamed, or stomach labouring with the effects of an erroneous regimen, by which he means all this fancy French food that the aristocracy are eating, and wine and all that, lays himself down and sleeps. His slumbers are tranquil and profound. It is difficult to wake him, but the moment his spirits are recruited, he awakes. He is perfectly easy, fresh, strong, and light. Now, obviously, this is very, very class-based. It's a bit problematic. The question of gender is also there as well. Anyway, let's think about a few stressors to kind of finish off. And these are masculine, really. The women also do have their stressors as well, he says, but he's really focused on the men. The man of fashion, disturbed by business, projects, pleasures, disappointments, and the regrets of the day, heated by food and drinks, that's the modern lifestyle again, goes to bed with trembled nerves, agitated pulse, a stomach labouring with the load and acrimony of his food, the vessels full, or juices which inflame them. Indisposition, anxiety, the fever accompanies him to bed, and for a long time keeps him waking. If he closes his eyes, his slumbers are short, uneasy, agitating, troubled with frightful dreams and sudden startings. Instead of the labourer's morning briskness, he wakes, this is the man of fashion still, with palpitations, feverish, languid, dry, his mouth out of order, his urine hot, low-spirited, heavy, ill-tempered, his strength impaired, his nerves irritated, it gets worse, doesn't it, and lax, his blood thick and inflamed, every night reduces his health and fortifies the seed of some disease, which I think Professor Foster also said, actually. Haven't we all been there? Anyway, so I'm going to finish now, really. Yes, and actually this is kind of important. So he says what these passions that cause problems for the man of fashion, the ambition of honour, the love of titles, the desire of possessing such a fortune as luxury renders necessary, are three principles that incessantly animate the man in high life, keeping his soul in continual agitation, which alone would be enough to destroy his health. So all these stresses kind of, really destroying not just his sleep, but his health as well. And he talks about the way he's frequently exposed to reverse of fortune, to mortification, sorrows, humiliations, rage, vexation, which continue and bitter. So he's not a happy man, really, is he? And what I find interesting at the end of this, he says, and what aggravates the danger of such distressing impressions is the necessity he is under to constrain or mask them. So he's moving around society, he's moving and shaking, he may be in the court, he may be, having mercantile ventures of some sort, but he's got to disguise the stress that he's under as well and the problems that he's got. As I said, this is very gendered, obviously, and some of these, he does talk about the problems of the ladies in a fairly sexist way, I have to say. We'll talk about that later if you want. Anyway, I'm going to finish. So some final thoughts. Sleep disturbance in the Enlightenment is due to a variety of causes and a variety of stresses, if you like, as we've seen. These shifts in medical theory, from humours to mechanics, mechanical body to nerves, meant changes in ideas about stress's relationship to sleep and treatments. Although some sleep treatments are pretty remarkably similar, actually, and just follow classical advice pretty much. So it's interesting how the treatments, they didn't really have many treatments, actually, that we would understand. But maybe the placebo stuff worked. Vestigial ideas about regimen. So they had a holistic approach to sleep and health, and this included religion as well. So the health of your soul, and this is true probably, Bill would probably say as well, is as important as the health of your body. And the two should be married. Religion was still important to most people. The modern lifestyle of the upper orders is ruinous to sleep. There are class and gender divisions. We can go into that a little bit more, but I'm interested in the importance of, in an age before the internet, television, radio even, literature was very important in conveying ideas to people of how, literature in the broadest sense of the written word and creative literature, including by doctors, by midwives, by other people who wrote, even quacks, about how to think about sleep and think about the stress you're under and how to cope with it. I haven't really talked too much about that. And what interests me ongoingly is the way that even Finch, at the start of the talk, could frame sleep in a positive way, sleeplessness, in a positive way, in the disruption of sleep in a positive way, and say, I'm suffering from sleep disorders, but it's because I'm too refined, sensitive, it's a badge of my civilization, or a sign of my genius. I'm not really talking about art and artists very much, but again, that it's a sign of, if you're an artist, if you're a writer, you almost have to have disrupted sleep, otherwise you're not genuine, you're not really suffering enough. Anyway, I'll leave it there, lots of ideas, but hopefully that's interesting.